for the shallow water, never afraid of the dark. Hard to handle, the excitable kind, take off running when I could have walked. And maybe I should listen when Mama said, girl, to yourself be true. I was hard-headed, couldn't make up my mind, was I waiting for only you? I will jump right into the deep end of the river of love, love, love. I gotta be satisfied, I wanna be baptized down in the deep end, down in the deep end, down in the deep end, down in the deep end. I told myself I would never surrender, though I was no stranger to the
Christine Ohlman has lived and breathed rock and roll since she was old enough to sing along to the radio. Known as the Beehive Queen, Christine is a powerhouse vocalist, best known as the featured singer with the Saturday Night Live Band, a role she has held for more than 3 decades. But SNL is only part of the story. In 2017, Christine was inducted into the National Blues Hall of Fame. She's appeared in Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, performed at both Obama inaugural galas, and performed alongside an extraordinary range of artists, including Elvis Costello, Bruce Springsteen, Bonnie Raitt, and many others. As a songwriter, band leader, and musicologist, Christine has built a career deeply rooted in rock, soul, and blues traditions, and that quest has taken her from Muscle Shoals, Alabama to New Orleans, from Nashville to New York. Simply put, Christine is one of rock and roll's most enduring and electrifying voices. She continues to tear it up on stage every chance she gets, and it's an honor to have her on the show. Welcome, Christine, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was beautifully put. I really appreciate it, truly.
Well, and I'm looking forward to the conversation for sure. Christine, by the time you traveled from Boston to New York on an overnight train all those years ago to make your first record at the age of 16, you were already a veteran of the local coffeehouse circuit around New Haven, Connecticut, where you grew up. In listening to you and watching you sing and play the guitar, I really get the sense that music has been a part of your entire life, maybe even starting when you were in the womb. What is your earliest recollection of truly loving music? Because I know you do. And where did that love come from?
Well, my parents were both musical. My father played the piano by ear, and my mother was a trained dancer. And so we had music in the house all the time. The record player was always playing. My father was wonderful about going out and finding, 45 RPM records that I wanted to listen to and collect. And sort of once the British invasion hit, I added those artists onto my rosters, in particular the Rolling Stones. But before that, I was a big fan of rhythm and blues already, soul music, started collecting records. And as I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes, that was one of the things that led to my getting into the band on Saturday Night Live. But I can remember doing shows for my grandparents and my parents, probably driving them all crazy from the time that I was about 5 years old and could get up on a milk crate or something and sing, so there was never any shutting me up, ever.
Well, it sounds like a great musical-filled house and a wonderful time growing up. Christine, you have such a distinct vocal style, and I know it's certainly been influenced because in researching, I know the kinds of music you listened to through the years, and you mentioned some of it, but I know your voice has been influenced through the years by everyone from Etta James to Janis Joplin to Tina Turner. And yet it's unmistakably yours. How did you forge your own voice and your late night, midnight hour feel, as I've heard you describe it? while being so heavily steeped in your deep Southern soul and rock and roll influences?
I guess I just at one point opened my heart to sort of let it all flood in and then whatever would come out. I've talked to friends of mine like Dave Marsh, who was one of the founders of Rolling Stone. Dave used to say that it was adult oriented soulful R&B or something. Like he had a name for it. But I really think that the more you steep yourself in things and open yourself to it, the more you realize that it is just going to influence the way you sound. And I have such a wide spectrum, Brian, of stuff that I love. It's everything from bluegrass to of course, Southern soul music, and then, like I said, some rock, like the Rolling Stones, my friend Ian Hunter, the band. So many. I mean, I guess if it's soulful, I gravitate toward it. So, and then, most of the time, I think you're not even sure you're stealing a little bit of it or a little piece of it, but you are. And next thing you know, you have a style.
Well, and you're certainly influenced by it. I wonder, do you feel like that style, and I asked about your voice, but it really is more than that. It's a whole style
Mhm.
and the cadence and voice. And do you feel like that has evolved over time? And also, does it change depending on sort of where you are in life and what you're listening to? And I think about, you take somebody like the Rolling Stones, and they've been making music for a very, very long time. And if you listen to every single song that they've done, there is a different sound, and
Yeah.
maybe it depends on where they were when they were recording it. Certainly depends on the time, um, when they recorded it and where they were, and what they were doing and who they were influenced by. But share your thoughts on that.
I think I've just been so lucky, really blessed, to first of all have been pushed into the world of the Saturday Night Live band, which is just sort of it's a classic soul band lineup with five horns, just the greatest players in the world. And then I began to spend a lot of time down south in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which, by the way, where I will be this year and singing some of those Rolling Stones songs. They recorded three songs in Muscle Shoals. And especially, I think, if you listen to Wild Horses or Brown
Yes.
Sugar, you hear the Southern accent coming in all of a sudden. But Muscle Shoals and New Orleans, where I'll also be headlining this year, and Nashville. Those three, to have spent time down there, when I go down there, I'm just lucky to play with some of the top musicians in the scene in every one of those places, including the Swampers themselves in Muscle Shoals. And you can't help but, I think, you can't help but up your game when you're thrown in with that level of musicianship. It seeps into your soul again. You respond to it. The style, the feeling that they bring to it, and the relaxation that they bring to it. The biggest thing I think that has changed in my singing is that I'm way more relaxed than I was when I was 25.
Mm.
I'm way more relaxed. I know what I'm doing and I know how to do it, and I'm just there for the fun and the groove and to interface and communicate with the audience. And I think that those are things that I've learned over time. And I do consider myself so blessed, and I am so grateful. I can't even begin to say how grateful I am.
You said that you're more relaxed. How does that play out? So if you're taking a song that you have sung for years at a particular tempo, or you can talk about the nuances of it. How has that evolved, and how does that play out being more relaxed? I mean, I think about maybe a slower tempo, but it's not just that,
No,
is it?
no. Uh, for a singer, if you're more relaxed in your body, you tend to open your throat more, I think, and that causes you to have more air in your voice. If I could just get technical for a minute, and that will give it more resonance. I had two points in my life when I suffered extreme loss, and in both cases, one was when my mother died young, and the other was when my husband passed away. Those both of those times, I was able to have friends in the business who got me out to do a gig shortly thereafter, sort of knowing that I would want to sing with other people. They were all, in both cases, they were a chance to sing with some of the top jingle singers in New York, and I just kind of folded in with them. And one of the things I found out was from going through those losses, my voice changed. I can't
Mm.
describe it to you any other way. My voice changed. It got more, maybe more resonant, but I also think it just got, it started to come from a deeper place. Because I do think, Brian, that where your voice emanates in your psyche and in your soul is a big part of how it sounds, when it finally comes out as notes and lyrics, you know.
Well, and in listening to all your music, it really seems to come from the soul, but I know what you mean, that can evolve based on experiences.
Yeah.
It can evolve based on maturity, just being
Yeah.
around more and sort of I don't want to say experimenting, but a little bit experimenting with range and that sort of thing. I want to ask you about Muscle Shoals
Mhm.
before, because you mentioned it, and I want to make sure I ask you about it.
Sure.
Muscle Shoals, Christine, has this almost mythical reputation in music history, and you alluded to it. So many legendary records came out of those studios. You mentioned the Rolling Stones. I know Bob Seger is from here in Detroit, and I know Main Street was recorded at Muscle
Yes, it
Shoals.
was.
I think there were a couple other songs that he
Oh,
recorded there. From your perspective, what is it about Muscle Shoals that created that magic?
they'll tell you that it's the river. They'll say it's the Tennessee River. They call it the Singing River. And they'll tell you that the river has something to do with it. I mean, who knows? And, in every case, when you have these iconic scenes, because I'm a musicologist, so you had Sam Phillips in Memphis with Sun Records, and you had a wonderful man named Rick Hall with Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals. And he began pulling artists from the surrounding towns. Arthur Alexander was a bellhop at the Sheffield Hotel. The great Percy Sledge was an orderly in the hospital, in the small hospital that's there.
Mm.
And these men began to come in, and women began to come into the studio at Fame and make records. And the next thing you know, people around the world were covering them. And it began to get a reputation as someplace where you should come. And when the Swampers broke off and bought a little studio on Jackson Highway, where I'll be performing at the end of April in a birthday celebration, I can't wait. Where it's April 2026 now, everybody, and they start. That's when, honestly, the white artists began to come. Cher, Bob Seger, Paul Simon, and Joe Cocker, and so many others began to come to 3614 Jackson Highway. And then other iconic studios opened up around the area, most of which, by the way, are still going strong every day. Wishbone, Muscle Shoals Sound, newer studios, the Nut House, and other great studios that are down there, Ivy Manor. There's as many studios now as there were, or more, in the 60s. And you're now seeing a slow migration from Nashville, which has really jumped the shark right now, and they're coming down. So Muscle Shoals is in good shape right now for music. But I will say that it was Rick Hall's vision, and then the great studio musicians who were known as the Swampers. And I've been so privileged to work with so many of them now in the 15 years that I've been going down there. And believe me, it's a privilege.
I didn't realize that there's a migration, and certainly Nashville, and we could talk
Yeah,
about Nashville,
yeah.
has really made its mark as a music center,
Mhm.
and with all genres, by the way. It's not
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
country or
yeah,
it's blues, it's classical, it's
hmm,
jazz.
mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that Muscle Shoals is enjoying this
Yeah.
resurgence.
I didn't mean they were migrating like moving, but their artists are coming down
Yes.
there to use the studio, although some of them are moving. There are some producers that have moved down and opened little studios, and some of them are beautiful. Nashville is at a point of inflection right now. It's way overcrowded. The traffic is worse than Los Angeles. I'll be the first one to say it.
Wow.
And it's just it's overflowing with too many people thinking they're going to make it in the country music world. However, they're still putting out great records. I won't say that. They're putting out fabulous records, and there's fabulous musicianship there. But it's like an overcrowded ocean liner that has way too many people on it. I wish them well, I wish them well.
You mentioned musicology, and you've given us a walk through history a little bit. And that's something that really stood out for me when I was prepping for the show, is that you're not just an incredible vocalist and guitarist and songwriter, but you're also a music scholar.
Mm.
Tell us about the origin of your interest in music history, and help us to understand the importance of looking back and connecting the dots in order to fully understand and appreciate music, because
Yeah.
I think that is the case.
It's so huge. I've been privileged to be part of something called the Sessions Panel, the sessionspanel.org. We go all around the world to music schools. It was founded by a wonderful woman named Jules Follett. And I do something for them called the Roots and Branches, where we talk to college students about what is important. If you want to become a working musician, you better know where it all comes from. If someone says to you, and you're a horn player, I want a little touch of Miles Davis, and you don't know who Miles Davis is, the next guy that comes in the door might, and he might get the gig. And so we talk to them in very down to earth terms. If someone wants a Jimi Hendrix sound, and you have no idea who Jimi Hendrix is, for me, it started with the fact that I was always attracted to African American music. I was always attracted to soul music, blues, early R&B even. And my brothers and my first band was produced by a guy named Bob Shad, who out of New York had produced Laverne Baker and Ruth Brown and other people like that. And he was a great influence on us. And then, I just kind of moved on from there. I began collecting records. I began really listening to different things that were going on. And then I began making mixtapes for my friends. That was a big thing to do. That mixtapes, they had themes. They were all Muscle Shoals tracks, all Memphis tracks, all Florida tracks, all Detroit tracks, and began sending them out to a very select group of people. And one of those people was G.E. Smith, who I'd known forever, and since I was a kid, who had become the musical director at Saturday Night Live. So, and our relationship kind of went on from there based on the mixtapes, because if some people just listen to records, Brian, and I, other people take the records into their soul and they become a part of them. And so then naturally you want to share them with other people. And that was always where it was at for me.
Do you find that the artists who just the iconic artists, I'll just say the Rolling Stones again as an
Mhm.
example. There are so many others. Do you find that the artists who stand the test of time and remain relevant for a long time, and the Rolling Stones are probably the best
Mm.
living
Well,
example of that,
Dylan,
I
Bob
think.
Dylan would be
Or Bob
another.
Dylan,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Another are is part of that because they are, I won't say scholars, but students of music, in that they really go way outside of their genre. I mean, I think of the Rolling Stones, and they spent a lot of time down in Jamaica for a
That's right.
while with
Mhm.
Peter Tosh and Bob
That's right.
Marley. They've spent a tremendous amount of time and I don't even know who they were hanging out with related to the blues, guys like Buddy Guy and
Sure.
John Lee
Yeah.
Hooker
Mississippi
and
Fred
really
McDowell. Yeah.
exactly. And is that part of the education or what it takes to really be relevant for a long period of time?
I think so, because then you end up, with a marvelous group like the Black Keys, who take everything they've known about the blues and just distill it, or Jack White, who just got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so deservedly so, I think, who just take it and distill it down to two people, a guy wanging on a guitar and a guy playing drums, because that's what a lot of it was in the beginning.
Hmm.
And as far as the Stones are concerned, they went into Graham Parsons, they went into, especially Keith Richard, went outside the box, toward almost country music, and then you end up with, great tracks in that with that flavor. I think that the more you know, the more you can steal, and there's nothing new in music. It's three chords and the truth, as they say. I always say, be a discerning thief. Take the attitude, take the essence of what someone is doing, and move it toward your own heart and soul. And that's how I think you absorb, and then it comes out in a whole new, innovative way for you. And you're seeing all kinds of, let's say something like Bruno Mars. We worked a couple of years ago with Smokey Robinson, and you really see Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. They were a group out of Motown. You see Bruno Mars, and he's Smokey Robinson, and he's wonderful at it. But that's really where his baseline is Smokey Robinson, and now he's innovating. From that, Adele is innovating from Dusty Springfield, from a wonderful British singer named Dusty Springfield.
Hmm.
And I am innovating from Dusty Springfield, from Mavis Staples, from Aretha Franklin, from June Carter Cash, from Patsy Cline. I am innovating from all of these different people, and women and men, that I have taken as influences.
Well, and those are the people that you're consciously influenced by, but the reality is you're
Yeah,
influenced by all music that you listen to, aren't
that's
you?
right. Yes, that's right. Everything that's in your environment that comes across, some of it's going to grab your ear in such a way that it travels into your brain. And later on, you might say, this is by the way, this is such an interesting point. One of the things about some of these plagiarism suits, George Harrison, My Sweet Lord, taking it from a girl group record by the Chiffons, you know, and and George Harrison finally saying, I guess maybe I did, and admit, I don't think he ever did it consciously. I just think it was in his head, and all of a sudden there it was, and so sometimes it comes out in a very direct way that people go, well, didn't you steal this from somewhere else? You know, um, I don't think I've ever done that, but you maybe I have. You really don't know. That's a great
Oh,
question.
yeah, I was going to ask you about plagiarism because there was a big suit not that long ago with Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
And what reminded me of it
Hmm.
was you said everything is three chords.
Hmm.
And wasn't that his
Tom Petty.
defense?
Yeah, Tom Petty.
Hmm.
In the end, it was. By the way, we talk about this in the sessions panel sessions. We have a great copyright lawyer named Paul Quinn who's on the session, and he brings that up. That in the end, Tom Petty's estate agreed to agreed with them.
Hmm.
Um, for who knows why? Maybe because they knew they were going to lose or whatever. But I would say to you, in musicology, I was once called to testify in a thing, and one of the things you do is you look at not just the chord structure, but the bass, what the bass guitar is doing. If you want to talk about a record plagiarizing another record, you look at what the bass guitar is doing. You really look at the whole panorama of the music and the melody. And that's where you get, because the three chords, as we would both agree, can be used a million ways and under a million melodies. So, how do you say that the whole thing was plagiarized? That's really, I think those are really the three. Well, maybe the groove as well, the groove, if
Hmm.
something is just so obviously moved over from something else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Christine, you've been known as you've are known as the Beehive Queen for decades. That's been the case, and
Yeah.
your platinum beehive and
Yeah.
sunglasses have become iconic. In
Mm.
fact, I have to tell you, I had this thought. It was a little bit of a panic that maybe you would show up for this show and you wouldn't have your sunglasses on. And I thought, oh my goodness, like it just maybe it wouldn't be the same, or it probably
Yeah.
would. And
Yeah.
these thoughts that dance around in our heads. But
Sure.
how did that nickname, the Beehive Queen, come about?
That's such a great question because I didn't name myself that. Years ago, someone said to me, we were just talking, someone said, "Wow, that Beehive Queen thing is really a good idea." And I said, "What do you mean?" The Beehive Queen thing. I'm starting to see it online. And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I still don't to this day. Somebody came up with it. But by the time they mentioned it to me, it was the number one Google hit. Now you have Beyonce, and she has the Beehive, so it's spelled a little different. But and then people say, "Well, what do you think about Amy Winehouse?" First of all, I thought she was a genius. So
Yes.
sorry that her life was cut so short. But she was getting it from the same place I get it from, which is the girl groups of the 1960s. I was honored to be a close friend of Ronnie Spector from the Ronettes. And
Yeah.
in fact, I was the MC at her celebration of life in New York when she passed. They had so much style, and so much of it had to do with the hair. So I had to go for it, and I'm eternally glad that I did.
Well, I love that you've done it. It certainly makes you distinct, but it also honors a time and a hairstyle that was very popular
Yeah. Yeah, and
at
I know
one
she
time
was
in
doing the
history.
same thing. She was doing the same thing. And
Sure.
you know, yeah, great question again.
Christine, I've spoken with many guests on the show about defining moments that have shifted the trajectory of their careers. And I think you had one of those moments back in 1991
I did.
when you joined the Saturday Night Live band. You started to talk a little bit about it, but how did you end up on SNL?
I was friends with G.E. Smith, who at the time was the musical director, the guy with the big long, ponytail,
Oh yeah,
blonde ponytail,
sure.
and great, great guitar player and a great friend. And one day my phone rang and it was him, and he wanted to know if I was free on a certain date to come and sing and do a gig. He did not tell me what the gig was, and thank God I was free, and I said yes. And then he said, "Well, it's going to be a gig with the band from the show. And, those tapes you've been sending me, we're going to take some songs off those tapes and write charts for them, horn charts and so forth, and come into New York for 2 days of rehearsal," and still never told me. And they put me up in New York at the Mayflower, and we rehearsed at SAR Studios way downtown for 2 days. The band was lovely to me and welcoming. It was a wonderful time. And then it was revealed that we were going to go out into the Hamptons in Long Island and do a club date. And the following night, we were going to play the reception at Lorne Michaels' estate for his recent wedding. He had been married in France, and he was having a big to do at his estate, and the band was going to be the band for the wedding. So great. So we play the club date. It was wonderful. The next day, they truck us all out there, big stage set up. Everyone is walking around that was anybody at the time. And we play a couple of sets. We have a wonderful time. And then I go back to the hotel on Long Island, and I think, well, that was fun, but I was a little depressed, that now it's probably over, but that was fun. The next week was the second week of the season. at SNL in September, and GE was up on the stage, and Lorne Michaels walks across the floor and looks at the stage and says, "Where's the girl?" And GE said, "What do you mean, where's the girl? Where's the girl that was with you at the wedding?" And GE said, "Well, I thought you just wanted me to get a singer for the wedding." "No, she was great. Tell her to come next week." And so that's how I say to everybody, I got it from a wedding gig, and I did. But here's the thing. I had been I'd been in touch with GE all those years after we had started. We had a band in Connecticut. We had stopped playing together. I was still in touch with him. I was sending him stuff. And as I was networking, I guess you would say, although it was just networking with a close friend. And that was what said to him, look, she's got all these songs. We could pick, some of them were obscure Southern soul songs that we still have in the book to this day. And but others of them were Aretha Franklin songs and a few other things, Etta James, and there were the songs. And so he kind of had a ready-made concert right there, that I had supplied to him, if you will, without thinking that's what I was doing. And so, they say, Brian, your life is what happens when you're making other plans. And I just, I didn't know. I didn't even know what gig I was saying yes to in the beginning.
Well, they also say that luck is when preparedness meets opportunity.
Isn't that true?
And so you were
Yeah.
you were certainly prepared. And then maybe another lesson is don't roll your eyes at the gig. You
That's
might
right.
end up on SNL.
Yeah, you never know. I was pretty sure it was going to be a great gig if he was on it, but I
Sure.
still really had no idea and did not even know that he was asking me to come with the band at first. I didn't know what he was asking me to do.
I've
So
always thought Saturday Night Live is one of the coolest gigs in the music business. And I grew up loving music, all
yeah,
genres of music, watching Saturday Night Live. And whether you're the musical act and you only get to do the show once, and there were
yeah,
lots of those,
mhm,
or you're part of the SNL band and you're on
yeah,
the show every week.
yeah,
Christine, you had a front row seat
mhm,
into all of it
yeah,
for over 30 years.
yeah.
When you pause and look back on it all, what has that journey been like for you personally? I just can't even imagine.
You get used to it after a while, which you think you never will at first, because it's not even a 7-second delay. It's totally live. Uh, and some of the things I've seen, um, Paul McCartney, the first time he was on the show and Chris Farley was still alive, he did a little mini set for us at the dinner hour and started to play Maybe I'm Amazed. And Chris Farley said, Christine, will you dance with me? And we sort of waltzed around the studio. The first time Nirvana was on, I remember that you looked at them and you went, I'm not sure what this is, but it's the coming thing. You just knew. You knew it was brilliant. You weren't really sure what it was, but we've had Aretha Franklin. We had Luciano Pavarotti come and sing with a full orchestra one Christmas with Vanessa Williams, who at the time had been, Miss America, and she had a musical career. The two of them. There were others I could, there are others I could mention, but every once in a while, something would just happen, and you'd be looking at it going, I'm so privileged to be in this rather small studio. What? Because it is pretty small, actually. It's people think it's bigger than it is. Watching this unfold right in front of me, you, Mick Jagger was the host one year, and you had Mike Myers playing Mick Jagger in a sketch and Mick Jagger playing Keith Richard, and it was hysterical. I mean, I
That was
just
hysterical.
the best ever, and so yeah, you never know, and the band that was on this week, Gorillaz, they've been together for 20 years, and this was the first time they were ever on the show. And they have such an interesting history, so again, it's a level of gratitude that I'm constantly trying to exhibit. know.
Well, it's absolutely amazing, and it also though seems incredibly intense. You talked about the not having the 7 second
7 seconds.
delay, and but even if you did, it's an entire week of preparation leading up to a 90-minute show
That's right.
that's broadcast to millions of viewers. I read something like 5 to 8 million viewers a week,
Hmm.
even today.
Yeah.
Tell us about the demands and rigor. So we see what's going on in front of the camera. Tell us about the demands and rigor of playing in the band and of the show more generally that we don't get to see on a weekly basis.
You have people there that have been there for as long as I have, that have not left, that have not moved. It's only 20 shows a year. So it gives people a lot of chance to do other things. The cameramen, the prop people, the people who build the sets and paint the sets. But day of the show, it's really the wig people, the makeup people, the hair people, and the costume department. They are like finely tuned precision machines that sometimes are completely transforming someone in a 1 minute commercial slot or a 2 minute commercial slot. They're getting dressed under the scaffolds. They're getting dressed in little corners. They're slapping makeup on them with somebody else is holding a light up so they can slap makeup on them. They're putting a wig on them. You know, yes, it's true that they do the scheduling of the skits. And if somebody has to have a complete metamorphosis, they're not going to do that in 2 minutes. But still, some of the stuff I've seen them do, and somebody is screaming into your earpiece, 5 seconds, get out there, 5 seconds. And, people are running, but they never screw up. And the few times they've ever screwed up are legendary. They let Sinead O'Connor pick a different song, even though they have never done that before. She comes out and does a song and rips up a picture of the Pope. And they had no idea, Ashley Simpson comes on and her drummer hits the wrong button for a track to go behind what she was going to sing. And she gets confused and she runs off the stage crying and leaves dead air. I was there for both those things, and I'll tell you that those are the only two times I've ever seen anything happen in hundreds and hundreds of shows. So these people are just the best. They're the best. It's the crew, and of course the cast. I mean, and the musicians. Everybody is up at the top of their game. But if the crew weren't there to support that cast, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Sure. Well, and it's tight. Like you said, if
Oh,
somebody has to do a total transformation, they're not going to be in the 1 minute slot. But
right.
the reality is every second counts, every
Yes.
minute counts. It's
Yes.
very, very tight.
Oh,
And you almost made it sound casual, and it's anything but
no, it's
casual.
anything but casual. And not only that, but they have boom cameras that are moving on wheels around the studio. Actually, they're moving. With some guy sitting in a seat with the camera hanging over on a boom, and of course there are handheld cameras and dolly cameras. But that's all happening too. There are wires all over the floor. I mean, the people that are on the floor, there's only about maybe 50 of them. And sometimes they move them away for
Mhm.
something. It's the people that are in the balcony that get to pretty much stay where they are. The whole thing is pretty much a balcony audience. But, um, it amazes me the little cubby holes they find for people to change their clothes. It's crazy. It's crazy, So, and then when it comes out on the screen, you go, wow, look how it looks. I mean, look how they changed his whole look with that wig, or something. I mean, I'm always amazed. We did Bo and Yang's last show was what we call the Christmas show. And they did he was in almost every skit, and they did a lot of wigging and everything else for him in that show, and then we sang with him in his last skit, and with Ariana Grande, and it was they really transformed him a bunch of times during that show, and there was a lot of love for him there. So they wanted to really say goodbye to him, although I'm sure he'll be back hosting. I have no doubt of that.
Yeah. You mentioned when Paul McCartney was on the show and
Hmm.
the Chris Farley dance, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one of those two men during that show is more meaningful for you,
Yeah.
especially given
Oh,
that Chris isn't with us anymore.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Can you share another time or two when someone, and obviously Sir Paul McCartney, and
Hmm.
I've heard that he's very gracious and
He's
very
lovely. He's always
friendly
hanging
and
around. He's,
approachable
yeah.
and right, but still, that's one of those times that you're just like looking and pointing and probably not even after having been on the show for years, just not quite believing and maybe wanting to pinch yourself that he's actually there. Uh,
Yeah.
can-
It- it- well, in his case, he lives in the same building as Lorne, I think. And so he comes around a lot. He just would come around and sort of hang out what we call the lobby, which is the middle section of the eighth floor there. All of a sudden, there he is just hanging around talking to people. He really is that gracious and that approachable. But yeah, the first time you see him, you're like, whoa, I think that's. But I had already sung. See, GE had pulled me into a show at Madison Square Garden in 1991. Bob Dylan's 30th anniversary of being on Columbia Records. And at that show, I sang with George Harrison. And they took us out to a soundstage in Queens to rehearse with him, sort of secretly almost. And he went around the room and introduced himself to everyone, which I just thought was so lovely of him. How do you do? I'm George Harrison. The next person, how do you do? I'm George Harrison. And so lovely. And so yeah, I mean, there have been some moments to see Aretha Franklin up that close. And back in the day when things were a little less corporate over there than they are. Well, let me just say, all right, but because Comcast owns NBC now, so they have for a while. But back in the day, it was a little bit more informal, and you would meet people in the hall, and you would go by them and say hello to them. I was having coffee the first time Bruce Springsteen was on, and I heard somebody from behind me. I was at a coffee machine. Hey, where'd you learn to sing like that? And I turned around and and I said, I don't know, the same place you did, and he just laughed and I laughed. And that was the first time I ever met him. So, uh, it, you realize that, they're only people. And honestly, sometimes the more iconic they are, the more gracious they are. I
Yes,
can't really remember anyone being a jerk. I can't remember anyone being a jerk. And so that says a lot with the number of
sure.
people they've had on that show.
Well, and I'm guessing there probably have been some, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
even ask you if any did come to mind. But
Mm.
Christine, of everyone you've worked with, from comedy legends to some of the most famous people in the world, who surprised you the most? Either because of their performance during the show, because of
Yeah.
something that happened during rehearsals, or even just getting to know them in the hallway.
I've worked with for years. I worked with a charity called Little Kids Rock, which is now called Music Will, and we did a gala every year. And in that gala, I worked with Brian Wilson. Um, I worked with um, I worked with Springsteen a couple of times. Um, it just is interesting that sometimes sometimes the way you think they're going to be is not the way they are. You're pretty Some people say, "Oh, Brian Wilson is so shy." Well, he really wasn't. He really was very willing to interface with everyone, and just have the best time with everyone. And but I think that I have a record out called The Deep End, and when I made that record, someone introduced me to Levon Helm from the band, and we went and recorded 2 tracks at his studio in Woodstock, which is still there. It's where they have the Ramble, they call it, in Woodstock. And Levon Helm was someone, he had cancer at the time, was fighting cancer at the time, and he was just someone that I just thought was so personable and willing to outreach. And we did one take, and we finished the take, and into the microphone he says, "Well, Christine, I think, you sang the hell out of that, but I don't think I did myself any favors right there. So with the drum track, so do you think we could do it again?" And and you're like, "Yeah, Levon, we could do it again." You just laugh. I mean, uh, and so I think what you realize is everybody is just a person. And like I said, for the most part, not a jerk. And so they have their life, you have your life. Now you're interfacing, doing this work together. And it's just a blessing, like I said before, Brian, it's a blessing, and
Mhm.
I'm eternally grateful.
You
So,
know, what a wonderful gift to get to see that humanity, that human, just one-on-one, person-to-person side of someone who really appears bigger than life, right?
such an
Because of
icon, you know.
yes,
And yet
absolutely.
there's a humanity there, and I do believe that because there's humanity there is one of the reasons why there's such a great artist. You know, I the week after or 2 weeks after that thing at Madison Square Garden, which was the biggest thing that had been done at that point, since there wasn't any, the biggest sort of all-star concert. I mean, everybody in this brother was on that concert, the Dylan 30th anniversary. They
Right.
put me to open for him with my band in Springfield at the Centrum, Springfield, Massachusetts. And I ran into him in the hallway with his minder, and he was about to go by, and he went, "Wait a minute, you were in New York." And I said, "Yeah, I was." And I said, "I got to say, did you enjoy it?" And he said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Is GE here?" And I said, "No, he's not here. This is my band." "And what are you doing?" I said, "I'm opening for you." He said, "No kidding." He said, "Did you have a good time?" And we just chatted and chatted and chatted. And afterwards, his road manager came over and said to me, "Number one, he never does that." He said he
Mm.
runs from people because he's so withdrawn. But he said, "But another thing is, he never stays and talks." He said, "But you talk to him like a normal person." And I said, "Well, in my mind, I was trying to go, please don't say something like your music changed my life. Don't go there, Christine. Just talk to him." And I did, and it was a great moment. And then we saw each other later in the night. But I mean, I don't know, just I think the humanity is something I think that's lacking a little bit these days. I'd like to see more of it. So it's important, I think, to know that in the arts it exists.
Yes. And not unrelated to that, I've always maintained that SNL isn't just entertainment.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of our culture,
Mhm.
of our world.
Yes.
Is the show, I'm curious about your opinion, is the show a mirror that's being held up every week, reflecting on what's going on in the world?
I think
Or is it relief from what's happening in the world?
I think it's a combination of both. That's really the perfect way to put it, Brian. It's a combination of both. I mean, they are very committed, I think, to keeping a perspective on what's going on. It's obvious which side of the aisle they're coming down on, but also, remember that after 9/11, there was that great show where they had the cast and Giuliani, and Lauren said to him, "Is it okay for us to laugh?" They only went off, remember 9/11 was, and they come on at the end of September every year. We come on at the end of September. I think they waited till like the third week of October or something. And then, and that was their opening. "Is it okay to laugh?" And the audience laughed. Giuliani laughed. Everyone laughed in relief. And they had provided a wonderful service. The day that the children were gunned down in Newtown, Connecticut, we had a show the next night, and they changed the opening to have the exact same number of children who had been killed singing on camera Silent Night for the opening of the show.
Mm.
And I was in the booth singing behind them, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And they have always been so good at those kind of societal, social moments where they can bring poignancy, but at the same time, if there is humor, they can bring humor into it, but certainly then they can bring poignancy. And then start the show. And live from New York, it's Saturday night. And the rest of the
Mhm.
show is going to be comedic, but oh, I do think it's both. And that's a great question.
I'm glad you brought up the show, which was the opening show of the season after
Yeah.
9/11,
Yes,
September
it was.
2001, and
Hmm.
and I want to make sure we get that line right because I think it's classic, and I remember verbatim
Hmm.
as Lauren and Rudy were talking, and the way Lauren phrased it,
Hmm.
he asked, "Is it okay to be funny?"
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
To which Giuliani responded, "Why start now?"
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's
Which,
right. Yeah.
which I thought was perfect, and it was just this. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe it was the start of healing
Yeah.
for our country. It
Yeah.
it certainly helped. It was awkward. I can't imagine the I have goosebumps just talking about it. Can't imagine being in Studio 8H for that particular show. It had to have
We
been
had,
incredibly thick, emotional,
yeah.
and yet beautiful and
Yeah.
and perfectly done, I think.
Yeah. They love to poke fun at themselves. But remember that at that time we had anthrax on the third floor. So after 9/11 was the anthrax thing in Rockefeller Center on the floor where they did the news.
Mm.
And Tom Brokaw at the time, I think. And so that was a whole thing. And uh, that played into it, and I think was maybe one of the reasons. Well, I think they just waited to they just didn't want to start the last week of September. But you're absolutely right. That was why start now. Yeah. And then they love to poke fun at themselves, in case you think we're so great, here, let us burst the balloon for you. And
Yeah.
and part of that, Lauren is always so willing to appear in a skit and often to be the butt of a joke. Usually it's the monologue where they do what we call the walk around, where they walk all around the studio and they run into Lorne, who's
Right,
doing
right.
something stupid usually, and he's really willing to do that. So I think that's a great thing too. No,
Definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Christine, you've watched countless musicians come and go over the years,
Hmm.
and some never get their lucky break, even though they're great musicians. Others find success for a short time, and a few sustain remarkable careers for decades, like you have. What do you think the ones with real staying power tend to do differently?
Number one, I think you have to be a real person first, and an artist or a star second. There has to be that we call it what we talked about before, that basic core of humanity. Uh, that gives you the platform on which to build your art and whatever else you're going to be subjected to. The 100-person road crew. The 17 semi trucks carrying you around on tour. If you're not grounded, the spin-off into drugs and alcohol is something that can be so debilitating and derailing of a career. The people that I know that have gotten sober and stayed sober, and I'm not going to preach about it, but are the ones that often have either get a second win in their career or are allowed to just kind of keep blossoming without the public knowing maybe how bad things had almost gotten, you know. And then, of course, you have the so many, and Miss Winehouse is the one that I think is one of the most heartbreaking, who just can't deal with it, don't have a support network, don't have, a family even that is willing to really stand by her. And the next thing you know, she's gone. Janis Joplin, uh, all of them that died at 27 back in the day. Jim
Hmm.
Morrison, Brian Jones.
Right.
They all had a lack of support, I think, in their time of need. And of course, and Hendrix. But I mean, back then, drugs were so rampant. But don't think they aren't today. They are. And you're always hearing about now. You're always hearing about overdoses and of young influencers and people in social media world. Um, it's something that has to be guarded against, but you really have to be a human being first. And 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 that is going to keep you, I think, from being a diva, from being somebody who expects too much of other people, uh, being from being someone who takes advantage of other people. Most of the greats that I've been associated with don't do that. Don't do that. They're just real people. You know. Good question again. Thank you.
Yeah. As you know, our show is called Life Excellence. And
Yeah.
having spent your career among some of the most talented artists and people in the world, what does excellence mean to you?
Um, Again, I just think it's the sense that you are always learning, that you're always willing to call yourself a student of whatever you're doing. I just think there is a path to a complete career in any career you're in that goes beyond what the retirement age or whatever, just to have that great sense of every day is a new day, every day is a day to learn something, every day is maybe a day to teach someone something, and every day is a day to connect. In my business, you're connecting with an audience directly through art. But in every walk of life, let's face it, you're connecting. You and I are connecting right now, and one of the big things about your show is showing people in all different walks of life and how they interface with each other, and with the wider family of humanity. So I hope that's a good answer. I don't
I
know.
love that.
Yeah,
That's a great answer.
education. Mm,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Are there any specific projects you have in the works? You talked about going down to Muscle Shoals again, or are
yeah.
there people you've connected with just about everybody throughout the history of music over the
It
last
seems
I
that
don't
way
know
sometimes.
40 years anyway, but is there anybody that you'd like to collaborate with or connect with musically?
Well, I haven't had a chance to sing with Mavis Staples yet, and I would love to do that. I'll tell you. But I will be in this springtime of 2026. I will be both headlining in New Orleans for the benefit of the New Orleans Women's and Children's Shelter, and then I will be in Muscle Shoals celebrating of the iconic 3614 Jackson Highway studio. Um, and I'm making a new record this year. It's called The Grown Up Thing. And I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to have some really cool special guests on the record with me. And, you know, in general, I'm just looking forward to continuing my journey, down as I say, the river of American popular song. It's deep and wide, and there's so much to be learned from it. I'm also hoping to do a little collaborating with my friend Charlie Musselwhite, who's a great blues artist in his 80s now, and still very much out there. And so I just I just look forward to learning, learning more so that I can do more.
Well, those old blues musicians are an inspiration because they just keep playing and playing and playing until they can't play anymore.
That's
And
yeah,
it,
that's the general feeling. If you saw Sinners, you saw Buddy Guy show up at the end of the movie, and in a featured role, and just he was really good. And also, you think, well, who else could they have gotten to do that but Buddy Guy at this point, you know? So that is the way it goes in the blues, and I do think that'll be the way it'll be for Bob Dylan, and the way it'll be for Keith Richard, and the way it'll be for me. So
Yes.
we just gonna go on, as they say.
Well, and you are certainly an inspiration, Christine. I've thoroughly enjoyed this
Um,
conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show. It's great to connect and get to know you, and I'm very, very grateful for our time together today.
Thank you, Brian. I feel the same. And thank you for your ultra perceptive questions, including a bunch that I've never been asked before. And that's saying something. So thank you for being so good at what you do and giving people such a great window into the world here.
You're very kind. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with the Beehive Queen, Christine Ohlman, on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.